Good evening, I'm Ryan Doyle, sitting in for Michael Corrin tonight. It isn't often that I hear about an issue making headlines and automatically advocate for a scorched earth policy. However, Ontario's Liquor Control Board and their recent labour woes happen to be that issue. Earlier this week, unionized workers at Ontario's booze monopoly voted overwhelmingly in favour of a strike. LCBO employees voted 95% for a job action if ongoing contract talks break down with the provincial retailer. Amongst the issues of contention in the contract negotiations is a plan to impose a 4-year wage freeze on the 7,000 unionized members. A move the membership feels is out of line, and a move that the cash-strapped Ontario government feels they have little choice but to implement. So while we're on the issue of things that are out of line, let me share a few things I can't seem to wrap my head around. To me, the idea of paying someone $50,000 a year to take a couple of bottles, stick them in a bag, and then hand those same bottles back to me seems out of line. Pretending in this day and age that a government can be in the booze business and still claim to implement social responsibility when it comes to drinking is out of line. We all know that any government tempted by easy money made off the backs of us, the taxpayer, is one that is quick to lose focus. And in an age where people's hours fluctuate and shift work seems to be the norm, I also find it out of line that if you want to buy a bottle of wine or a six-pack of beer, the powers that be hold you hostage to their rigid store hours, proving how out of touch with the lifestyles of their clientele they actually are. It's also hard to explain why, when you look at Ontario's Sunshine List, there are hundreds of people making big money either in cushy management positions or roles that don't quite seem relevant to alcohol sales. To put it short, you have a government agency that on one end overpays union members to do a job that a chimp could learn, and on the other, a top-heavy and bloated web of overpaid and redundant managers that are taking the taxpayer to the cleaners, all so we can pretend to be socially responsible. The answer is clear. It is time that the government got out of the booze business. It seems silly to say that I see a certain type of freedom when it comes to breaking the chains of this government monopoly. After all, it's only buying alcohol we're talking about. But the whole concept of government knows best is what's at play here. And Big Brother is costing all of us a fortune. The sale of beer, wine, and spirits in corner stores and supermarkets would give Ontarians more freedom of choice. And even if it didn't necessarily mean lower prices, it would infuse competition into the market while at the same time put an end to the bloated beast that currently peddles our hooch. So they want a higher wage as opposed to a wage freeze at the LCBO. I mean, the government has a stranglehold on this monopoly. It just drives me around the bend, as I mentioned. John Robson joins the Sun News Network in Ottawa. John, this seems like a union at the very least with the LCBO that is just out of whack with what's going on in the private sector and the real world.
I think it is, and I think that is characteristic of the public sector more broadly. When you look at the Sunshine List and that sort of thing, the recent deal with the teachers, there seems to be a conviction in the public sector that the fiscal crisis and the need for restraint are not real, that they are manufactured by mean-spirited people, and that if the public sector leads the way in defying the notion that we better tighten our belts, somehow it will expose the illusion and the manipulation and the deceit, and everybody will get to live as though they worked for the government.
Well, and that's exactly it. I mean, where are they living where they think that that's a reality, that's going to happen that way? I mean, to me, you've got executives on this Sunshine List making hundreds of thousands of dollars, middle managers making hundreds of thousands of dollars, people that have titles that are so obscure I couldn't even tell you what they do, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, and people putting, alcohol into paper bags at 50 grand a pop. That doesn't seem like unrealistic bad money.
Yeah, and again, the saying that if you're inside the fishbowl, the outside world looks warped. It's like the teachers going on strike and believing, genuinely, I think, in many cases, that they were the downtrodden, that they were the wretched of the earth, even though they're making about twice the average salary in Ontario after 11 years on the job. And, it's one of those things if you don't talk to people in other situations, you can be deceived. But there's also, and I think this is more true of the leadership than it is probably of the rank and file, there's a fundamental kind of philosophical divide between people who think reality is tricky, as Thomas Sowell put it, and that there are really serious obstacles, and people who think it's all in the mind, and that anybody who says there are problems wants there to be problems, probably for personal gain, but possibly simply out of a twisted psychological defect that forces them to try to make other people miserable. And so you could show them any number of statistics, and their basic reaction is, that just proves that you're one of them, as opposed to saying, wow, this is really pretty serious stuff here. We've got a government debt that's out of control. And then there's the issue that amazes me. I mean, the LCBO. Who would like to sell the LCBO? Well, how about David Peterson? Yeah, he said he was going to privatize it, campaigned on it. How about Mike Harris? Oh, yeah, the common sense revolution. Out it goes. And then Greg Sorbara saying, well, we've really got to have a review of alcohol policy in this province because there hasn't been one since the 20s, and it's a patchwork. And then what happens? Along comes Premier Dad and says, if we weren't selling you alcohol, you'd be boozing it up to the detriment of your health and the ruin of society because you all are not competent adults. But then this patronizing, idiotic, and slothful approach to the whole thing rebounds because are you really telling us that you are going to get us into a situation where people in Ontario cannot buy alcohol until you give in to the demands of a union that's living in an economic fantasy land? Is that really how this plays out?
Well, right. And I mean, that's the balance and the trade-off that you have here. Okay, well, if the union doesn't get what they want, they hold the booze hostage. And I'm not speaking like I'm an alcoholic, but everybody should have a right to go down and buy a six-pack or a bottle of wine for dinner. And at the end of it all, when you have the government sort of, protecting this, and I don't believe for a second that it's social responsibility, I think it's all to do with the money that they're addicted to and the profit that they're addicted to, then we're sort of left in the middle saying, well, what's next? Where do we go from here? Somebody has to go to the realm of privatizing this thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a very real possibility if there's a strike, the government will force them to go back because without suggesting that the people of Ontario are to a man or a woman lushes, you start telling us, no, you cannot have a beer at the end of the week. We're terribly sorry, but we've messed up labor relations and we have this monopoly. So you just can't have a drink until it's over. It's like hearing that news makes me need a drink, okay? The public pressure would be overwhelming. But again, you can pretty much count on the Ontario government to do the least logical thing in the least orderly way. And when push comes to shove, who knows what they'll do? Legislate them back, declare it's an essential service or something. I mean, there are people, apparently, I'm told, who cross provincial borders to buy alcohol, although technically you're not really meant to do that. Tut, 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 tut. You're not a grown-up. You can't decide to go buy beer in Quebec. I mean, that could lead to chaos, anarchy, confusion. But, of course, a lot of people in Ontario don't live near the Quebec border. It's kind of a big province. And but the government's put a knife to its own throat, because they've created a monopoly, they've given the people in the monopoly unreasonable wages, unreasonable expectations, and a power to strike that it is then something they can't allow them to use. So maybe it's a rubber knife, but this is all self-inflicted. None of this grows out of economic rationality or sound political philosophy.
No, it sure it is. And you know what? You want to talk about political philosophy. You mentioned Mike Harris. I remember way back in the day where he said he was going to put beer and wine in the corner stores. He didn't fulfill that campaign promise. God knows he fulfilled others, but not that one. Tim Hudak, who is now the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, he's saying the same thing. But why should we even believe him?
Well, yeah, at a certain point, when you've been promised this over a period of 3 decades by 2 different parties, you start to get the feeling that you're like the donkey with the carrot on the stick, and you're not meant to realize that no matter how fast you walk, you'll never get any closer because the stick is moving with you. But again, with so many things, I said the government had done it to itself, but voters too have done it to themselves. That if we will really let our government treat us this way, then we're going to get treated this way, and we're going to have done it to ourselves. We ought to say, listen, the government has certain essential functions. There are disagreements about how far the responsibilities of the state extend, but nobody can show me a book of political philosophy other than, I don't know, George Bernard Shaw, who had a pathological fear of alcohol, that can possibly suggest that the government should be selling me booze. And I mean, I remember the old days when it was like the Soviet Union where you'd go and you'd pick something off a list and then you go and place your order. At least that had the genuine impact of saying, we want to see if you really want to drink because we're going to just make it gratuitously miserable. Now, of course, they're offering you a glittering selection, convenience, sample packs.
Glossy magazines.
Yeah, all this like, hey, yeah, I think I would like to have that beer. And so they're obviously not trying to stop us from drinking beer. And if they're really determined to rake in the bucks, they can do that without themselves selling it. They can impose any fool requirement they like on private merchants. as opposed to having a monopoly, because they've always had one, and they can't rethink things even when they try, which again, Greg Sobar's words, I think, are the most haunting ones. It's like, yeah, we haven't reviewed this since the 1920s.
John, I would also say that, they're not in tune with regular everyday people. I mean, shift work being what it is, if you're not, if you're working nights, let's say, and you're not off till 2 in the morning or 11 o'clock at night, you can't even go and get a bottle of wine or a bottle of beer then.
Yeah, and again, all of this is just absurd. If I'm grown up enough to work a night shift, I figure out for myself how I try and make ends meet. In a difficult economy, I can decide for myself when to buy beer and where to buy beer and how much of it to drink. Because, of course, people say, oh, but people will drink irresponsibly. Oh, and they don't now? You can't buy liquor at the LCBO and then drink it excessively? None of it makes any sense. And as classic in government, that means it won't go away.
John, appreciate the time.
My pleasure.